December 7th, 1941. A sleeping giant awakes with terrible resolve. You're watching History Hound Infamy. Two important things about December 7th. The first is that it's the birthday of our esteemed cameraman, Avery. Say hi, Avery.
Hi, everyone.
The second is that it marks the anniversary of a day that will live in infamy. The attack on Pearl Harbor. This is the first video of my three-part series on a theme that I think is very important to remember and easy to lose sight of. Stick around for the end. You'll see where I'm going. But first, World War II. Where do I begin? Like most global conflicts, there's many things leading up to the war itself. So instead of talking about the events surrounding the rise of Hitler, the Holocaust, the post-World War I era of tensions, and the volatile situation in Japan following the Japanese Sino War, culminating with the Nanking Massacre. Yeah, let's just start with September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. Okay, you know that's not a real ad, right? Anyway, Germany invades Poland and war breaks out. I won't go into great detail. You can watch future videos for that. But the lines were drawn. Germany allied with Italy, Japan, and to a lesser extent, Hungary and Romania, while the British Empire united with France, Russia, China, and honestly, just about every other European nation. In the first few years of the war, the United States didn't really have any official involvement. They supplied a great deal of support to the Allied forces. The U.S. itself is actually split on if it should even be involved. There was a great deal of reluctance to be involved in another global war after the number of losses the U.S. took in the First World War. Even as Hitler's march through Europe left Britain as the only remaining European superpower, and as Japan's own expansionism came into direct conflict with U.S. interests, the U.S. still held as a passive ally. In fact, it wasn't until well into 1940 that a majority of Americans were in favor of helping out their European allies. Let me be clear, I'm not saying that America was unsure which side to take. There was no doubt that Hitler's ideologies were morally bankrupt and that his grip on Europe was devastating. They just didn't believe that we were served well by stretching our forces overseas. That debate ended on December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacked the U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, which hadn't yet achieved statehood, in an attempt to keep the U.S. Pacific Fleet from intervening with the other attacks on Guam, the Philippines, Wake Island, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Manila that would come on December 8th. If they were reeling from the heavy losses from an unprovoked attack on one of their primary Pacific naval bases, then the other attacks would go off with minimal direct intervention. Yeah, Pearl Harbor was meant to be a distraction. And yeah, in that specific regard, it worked. All of those battles ended in favor of Japan. The attack came at 7:48 a.m. Hawaii time, when 6 Japanese aircraft carriers launched 353 dive bombers, fighters, and torpedo bombers. Unexpected and out of the blue, these aircraft came in 2 waves. 21 ships were lost or damaged in the attack, as well as almost all of the 408 U.S. aircraft were either destroyed or severely damaged. This is to say nothing of the cost of human life. Nearly 2,500 U.S. military men were killed, with over 1,000 more injured. A large portion of those losses came from the destruction of the USS Arizona, where 1,177 sailors lost their lives, most of them junior personnel. Most of the dead were aged 17 to 18 years old. President FDR would declare war on Japan the following day with one of his most famous speeches, where he referred to December 7, 1941 as a date that would live in infamy. And hey, here we are, almost 80 years later, still talking about it. Within an hour of his address, Congress would formally declare war on Japan, and in the days that followed, the rest of the Axis powers. Remember how I said the main purpose of the attack was to cripple and distract the U.S. naval fleet from intervening in the Pacific? Well, it wasn't its only purpose. It was widely believed that this attack would demoralize the U.S. and pressure the government into easing up on economic and diplomatic sanctions currently employed. In this regard, the attack was a catastrophic failure, which they could have guessed at if they watched my video on the Alamo. Actually, it is possible that Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamanote might have seen my video, and he is quoted as saying, "I fear all we have done is waken a sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve." Which is what happened. Though as a side note, he didn't actually say that. It was just written as part of the film Tora. Makes for great cinema, but inaccurate reporting. He was said to have reluctance for the attack, and also great regret, but the famous quote itself was never actually uttered by the Admiral himself. So now no longer the sleeping giant has entered the war, and oh, how the tides have turned. Most historians say that the addition of the USSR and the US to the Allied forces in 1941 as a turning point for the war. The Axis powers were suddenly fighting war on several fronts and finding it to be very difficult. Specifically, the US involvement in Operation Neptune, also known as D-Day, the Soviet victory in Stalingrad, and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were all significant factors that led to Japan surrendering and Hitler's Third Reich falling. 80 years. It's a long time ago, but then again, in the scope of history, really not all that long ago. You'd think after how Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and frankly, how we repaid them at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that Japan and the US would be mortal enemies. Both of these actions have been looked at by historians as borderline war crimes and acts of terrorism. Both sides have every right to swear eternal anger for their enemy. And yet. In that you would be hard-pressed to find a more US-friendly nation than Japan, and vice versa. I would argue that no two nations have benefited more from each other politically, economically, and on the military front. Partnerships between the two nations have led to some of the greatest technological advances the world has ever seen. And it's not slowing down. US pop culture has had a huge influence on Japan's youth culture, while Japan's youth culture has become a huge part of American entertainment. There's an easy argument to be made that our 80-year-old transgressions should have us at each other's throats, but we've somehow become the strongest of allies in every respect. And that's the lesson. If you're an American watching this around the time of publication, then you've likely found yourself on either the winning side or the losing side of a very continuous presidential election. Normally, no big deal. We dust off and move on. But we haven't yet. We spent so much time convincing ourselves that the other guy is the enemy that we've made it true. Some are scared that we're plunging ourselves headfirst into a civil war of ideologies that can't be mended. Friends and family members, now bitter enemies. It needs to stop. Japan killed 2,400 Americans in a surprise attack, and replied by killing over 200,000 civilians with 2 atomic bombs. And now we play Pokemon Go while the Japanese watch Disney movies. Seriously, if we can't achieve that, then what's to stop us from forgiving Aunt Edna the mean things she said to you because of your political affiliation? What's to stop us from asking for forgiveness for the mean things we said about Aunt Edna over her political affiliation? I truly believe that for the most part, the American voter believes what they do because they think it's what's best for their country. I'm not going to get into any arguments over if individual politicians share those same beliefs. But the guy at the grocery store with the MAGA hat believes in his heart that he voted in the best interest of the country. The lady with the Biden 2020 bumper sticker believes that in her heart that she voted in the best interest of the country. And I'm certain, dear viewer, that you, no matter who you voted for, did it because you had the best interests of the country in mind. Even though it might be opposite sides of the yard from your loved ones, it's common ground. It's where we should start. You've been watching History Hound. I'll see you in history.